Let's talk about some of the thrillers I read in 2020. This video is going to include my reviews for any sort of detective or mystery novels as well as thrillers. There was about a 6 month period of time where I wasn't filming videos, so I have a lot of books to review and catch you up on. I'm splitting them up by genre. Like I said, this is my thriller roundup video. One of the first thrillers I read during quarantine was The Watcher by Kateri Fisher. Where the fuck is it? Nope. Was The Watcher by Jennifer Pashley. The Watcher by Jennifer Pashley. This is a book I got off NetGalley back in the summer. I requested this from NetGalley because this was the first in a detective novel series. If you know me, you know I love that. And overall, this was just okay. This is a small town crime story where all of a sudden a woman goes missing and a child nobody knew about is left behind. I found the core family really interesting, the woman who goes missing as well as the child and that little family unit. I thought that was definitely the interesting perspective of this story. It actually reminded me, the vibe of this story actually reminded me a lot of Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, which is one of my favorite novels of all time, and so I definitely think I gave this more leeway than I probably would have otherwise. Unfortunately, of course, the comparison makes the flaws in this one even worse because Gillian Flynn is such a great writer. The detective character, on the other hand, I didn't love as much, and I feel like a lot of the flaws of the book were very apparent in the detective work in particular. A lot of the things that were done made absolutely no sense, and because a lot of this book was about class and privilege, because it's such a small town and there's such a huge gap between the poor side of this town and the wealthier people of this town, I think that if they had maybe talked about that and about how that has affected the precinct, maybe the shitty detective work would have made more sense. But as it was, you just kept thinking, like, these cops are terrible at their jobs. I did find it very compulsively readable. I just wanted to read more and more. It went back alternating chapters between the detective character and this son who is part of the family unit that is having the mystery happen to, and his perspective was so great. I loved it so much more than the detective chapters, and if this had been entirely from his point of view, I think I would have really enjoyed this book so much more. Unfortunately, I understand why it wasn't, because obviously this is going to be a series based on the detective of the novel, but I don't think I'll be reading more in this series. Even though I didn't hate this one, I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next thing I read was also something I got an ARC of off of NetGalley, and that was Interference by Brad Parks. This was a mystery involving a man who goes missing, who works at this lab involving some sort of technology. This book felt like it was being sold as the next Dark Matter, which I absolutely loved when I read that back in 2019, and that's mainly the reason I picked this book up. Unfortunately, I felt like the way this book was marketed wasn't quite accurate, and I found that pretty disappointing. I also felt that a lot of the characters' motivations were lacking. This book has many point of views, and it has very short chapters, which makes things exciting because you always want to read more. But unfortunately, it doesn't give the characters enough room to breathe to really show you who they are. Even the main character's wife, who has her husband go missing, she has the most amount of reason, obviously, to be upset, and yet you still don't feel like you see any emotions from her, other than just this frantic worrying and running around trying to figure things out. But it would have been nice to have a little bit of build-up between her character and her husband to show like how in love they are or how much they care about each other, and that was never really there. There were other characters too that you could never really figure out their motivations or why they were there, why they were involved with this thing, and it kind of just went nowhere. It was never really answered. I will say the twist, the final reveal, I didn't see coming, and I enjoyed that. That doesn't happen often, and I think that was a plus in and of itself. I don't think that this is a waste of a read, but it definitely isn't something that I'll remember a year from now. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Might as well get the last NetGalley book out of the way, and that is The Night Swim by Megan Goldin. Now, some of you might already know what I think about this book because I included it on my worst list of 2020, so clearly I wasn't a fan. This book takes place from a podcaster's perspective. She's in town to cover this trial, and it is very much reminiscent of the Brock Turner trial. There are some podcast elements where she is telling this story of this trial, as well but they are kind of few and far between, and to me they don't really add anything to the book. The other part of the story is told in letter form from someone who has listened to the podcast and wants her help finding out who may have been involved in her sister's death. I had a lot of problems with this book, but mostly it comes down to the fact that I don't think it handles rape. I don't think it handles the talk of rape culture that well. I think it is very surface level look at rape culture and how women are affected by these things. I think you can get a much deeper perspective in many other books besides this one. I also found the main character to be not very interesting. I didn't care about her at all, and I've heard that this is going to be a series starring her character, and I just don't understand that because there's nothing about her that would make me want to read from her perspective again. I also thought that this is another instance where if the entire book had been about this other case and had been from the sister's perspective of trying to solve this case of her sister's death, that would have been a million times more interesting. I also don't love using the Brock Turner case because it almost feels like a gimmick to get people to pick up this novel, and that just feels icky to me. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, and honestly, I don't recommend it. The next book I picked up was You Let Me In by Camila Bruce. I had no idea what to expect going into this. I thought I knew, but I was totally wrong, and I think that excited me more than anything else. This is about a best-selling author who suddenly goes missing and leaves behind this letter for her niece and nephew to find. She has a very complicated history because she was once acquitted of murder. This final letter is going to reveal to her niece and nephew her life story, telling her what really happened. In general, this sounded like an interesting premise, but oh boy, did I not know what I was in for. This story has a lot to do with fairies, which was not in the description at all. That's probably a spoiler, but to me, that's a deciding factor on whether or not you're going to pick up this story. I think if I'd known that, I probably would have picked it up sooner because I just think it's such an interesting twist on a thriller to include some sort of paranormal aspect that you don't see a lot. When Cassandra, the author, was a little girl, she started seeing somebody called Pepperman. He came into her room at night and started talking to her, and they bloomed this very interesting friendship. I honestly can't say a lot more than that, but obviously some things happened, she gets accused of some things, and you never really know what's going on. You never really know if what she's seeing is true or not, and it's kind of left up to you to decide. I love this so much because of the idea that this could be what really happened, or this could be all the psychological mind of a child. It's a very quick read, and I think more people should definitely pick this up. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Another thriller I read in quarantine was Believe Me by JP Delaney. I picked this up on audiobook because it was on sale, I think, on Kobo at some point. Let me just tell you right now that this is one of the worst thrillers I've ever listened to. This is about a struggling actor who gets hired by a divorce firm who essentially want to entrap husbands into cheating so that the wives can get everything in the divorce. That sounds like an interesting premise. I like the idea. But eventually it really goes off the rails. There are so many twists that everything becomes so incredibly stupid that you really can't wrap your mind around it. Like, I was enjoying the first probably 40%, but just as things went on, it just became more and more unbelievable. The relationship that she embarks on with this one dude who just like spends a fortune on her and changes her lives in ridiculous ways just made no sense to me, and I enjoyed the ending enough. It wasn't really that interesting by the time we got there because there had been so many twists and reversals that I didn't really care about anything anymore. But the ending worked fine, I guess. I honestly just wouldn't recommend reading this. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, but I honestly should have given it a 1 star. Like I said, this year I'm trying to use more of the rating scale. This is one of those instances where I gave it 2 stars because I just don't give anything 1 stars, but really, it didn't deserve that 2nd star. The last book I'll talk about in this video is Life Between by some people. The Wife's Between Us by Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen. Most people have probably heard about this. I know that these authors' books are very popular. For whatever reason, I was on a thriller kick and I decided to pick it up. This takes place in two different perspectives. Perspective A is about a woman who has just left her husband, while perspective B is the story of a woman just meeting that same guy and starting her relationship with him. I ended up loving this. I saw the big twist, the big reveal coming from a mile away. I think it's very obvious, and so for me, this wasn't the thriller aspect that I enjoyed of it. It was the psychological aspect of it, the character study work of it, because to me, this was such a great examination of an abusive relationship. I think the author did such a good job at showing the red flags, at showing the way a partner gets treated in a relationship like this, but also showing the way that they can often blame themselves. The physical as well as psychological abuse, the control that's exerted, the way that a toxic partner will try to cut the other one off from everything around them. I just thought this was such a good examination of... I just think the authors did such a good job at showing that type of story. If you're looking for a book with a lot of twists and turns that's going to shock you, I don't think this one is it. But if you're looking for a deep character study or a toxic relationship study or a toxic relationship examination, I think this is a really great one to pick up. I have more books to talk about, but my card is full, my battery's dying, and so I think I will leave it there for now. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you'll come back again soon. Bye.